Welcome everyone. It is IKYA Live, world news from the spiritual perspective, and the only news program in the world bringing you spiritual, practical advice for your everyday life. Tonight we have a special episode. Our intention with IKYA Live was, or is, to bring a news program where we look at the day's news topics from a higher perspective, a spiritual perspective. And we've been reflecting that as we have a brand new course in IKYA Mantra starting in just a few weeks and an open house tomorrow evening, we've been reflecting on, if as a spiritual seeker we're to receive IKYA Live and to actually understand the message and be able to work through how IKYA presents the world's, or the events of the world around us from a higher perspective, we as spiritual seekers need to also elevate our consciousness, to open it, to receive that message, and also then to be able to live the teachings that are presented here in IKYA Live out in our lives. So we've chosen tonight to focus in on a really kind of perennial topic within all spiritual communities and spiritual study, as long as spirituality has been part of the human awareness. And that is the spiritual practice or the discipline. There are always questions about what are the best spiritual practices, what can help me grow the fastest. And of course the ego is always wondering what's going to get me the most of what I want, right? So there's always been a debate throughout time and in different spiritual communities about what are the best practices, what's most effective. And we thought it's important that we dig into that too for your benefit, because again, for us to really make IKYA Live come to life and for us to be able to help the world to evolve past the sort of primitive conflicts that we're working through, we need to be able to also elevate our own consciousness, and that is done through spiritual study. So, first and foremost, down below you've got to like and follow IKYA.official here on YouTube, and also on our social media, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, IKYA.official. And down below you'll also see the link for all the information about IKYA Mantra Collection 5, our newest course that will be starting in a couple weeks. And be sure to stick around for the whole episode, because IKYA will be talking more about that course in particular toward the end of the episode. So let's go ahead and turn it over now to a real discussion tonight about all of the types of spiritual practices, how they work, why they work. And remember that as a discussion, we need your questions and comments below, in the comments below here online, and we also have a live studio audience, and I'll feed their questions in. So IKYA, let's turn it over and begin this discussion about, kind of what is the universe of spiritual practices?
Well, I think first we need to talk about what actually is a spiritual practice, because everybody talks about spiritual disciplines and spiritual practices, but what are they in essence when you look beyond the technique? And it's really something you repeatedly do with the intention of expanding your awareness to the point of the expansion becoming permanent, right? So it's stuff that people have figured out throughout history that will bring them into a higher state of consciousness, right? And then we repeat it. Then we do it again. It becomes a practice, right? With the intention of the expansion becoming permanent. And it can be anything. It's first of all the intention behind it and the discipline. We'll unpack this a little bit over the course of the next hour, but different cultures have come up with different ways, because I think in us as humans, we are all aware really that we're spiritual beings in human bodies. All cultures have figured this out, and they've wanted to reach higher states. Right? And when you look at human evolution, it's been like everything and whatever. And then you grow a certain practice in a specific culture, right? And that becomes the thing, and this is the right way to do it. And I think we've come to a point in human history where we don't really have to relate to that. Right? I often use food as a reference, looking at everything that's happened with food. In many countries, you have very strict traditions that you have to do this way. This is how the recipe is supposed to be. And then people are like, meh, I can mix a little bit of that because I think it's good. And I think this is the wonderful thing about spiritual practice today, is that we get to kind of disconnect a little bit from traditions and from belief systems. And then we can actually explore, does this work? Does it work for me? Because often you'll find that a certain practice may work for some people, and then again, other people get no result whatsoever. Right? And we need to listen to that. We need to be true to ourselves and our own path and figure out what type of tools do we need. It used to be people having to be dedicated to a certain practice, dedicated to a certain belief system, a certain whatever it is, and only then, right? It's a level of submission that is the same as you find in all religion, as I've talked extensively about. I think spiritual awakening is also waking up from all of that. And then it becomes more complicated in a way, because then it's not about following rules. And if you're not to follow rules, you have to connect, because rules are there to assist you when you are not in awareness. When you have no idea about anything, and you don't understand the bigger picture or consequences, you need rules to guide you, because otherwise you will harm yourself and others, right? But as you begin to grow into a state of awareness, you don't need rules anymore, because you get it, you can see it. You connect with life, and you're able to determine whether or not something promotes healing and growth, or whether it blocks you, right? But for you to be able to grow out of the framework of traditions, you need to connect deeper. You need to have practiced quite a bit, and to me it doesn't matter what you do, but you need to come to a point where you start connecting to what this is about. Right? Meditation is not sitting down with your eyes closed and focusing, or it's the state that you move into, often after having meditated for several days straight. Then you start moving into the state of meditation. It's the same thing with all practices. You get to a point where you have transformed, right? And the technique is simply the technique to bring you there. When you look at different cultures, they also represent different types of consciousness, different journeys. And it also means that the traditions and the things they have figured out to lift them into higher consciousness has also been defined by what do they mean by higher consciousness? What is it actually they're trying to achieve? Because we should not assume that everybody has the same understanding of what an expanded awareness is and what it is for. So we also need to look at the different practices from that perspective. And I'll be going through some of the more common practices and talk a little bit about it. But if you have any questions, if you want to figure out anything around spiritual practices, please send us questions. Because it's a really interesting topic. And I talk to so many people who are confused when it comes to spiritual practices and how to do them and why and how to get the best results and this and that, if they're doing it right, if they're following the rules, all of that. And I think as part of our process of awakening, it is important that we get to understand our toolbox, right? And that we learn how to apply practices in the way that will work for us. Now, why are spiritual practices important? Why isn't it enough just to like walk around and do our things and then we die and then we get more advanced? You can do that. It takes a very long time though. We incarnate again and again and again and again, and often we repeat most of it. And any of you who have been working with past lives, you know that there's a lot of repetition going on. Evolution is very slow. So when we only operate through the biological consciousness, the changes and the learning and the transformation in biology and the human journey will be the only growth. And it's very slow. And humans have figured out that, oh, well, we can do more than that because we are more than this. Many people believe also, well, we're modern people. And why would we need spiritual exercise? Because our life is better and, you know, we are more advanced. And actually, we're not more advanced. Our civilization is more advanced, but it doesn't mean that we are. I would say that we need spiritual practices more than ever. And one reason that I think all of you can relate to is the level of noise. There is so much noise everywhere. There is noise around us. There is noise inside. And we have created a world that we get sick from living inside, right? No one can deal with it. We have created a very, a kind of a hostile environment for human growth, right? When you look at emotional, mental imbalances and illness, physical illness, we're simply not healthy, and we're not happy, and we're confused. And it's because our biology is very different from our civilization. Remember that our genetics has not really changed for the last 100,000 years, right? So modern life is extremely stressful. Now, stress is recognizing that our programs are not sufficient because in theory, we should all go on autopilot the entire time, and our whole body is a set of many autopilots, making sure that the body works and everything. And just think of the amount of chemicals that we have in our modern environment that we didn't used to have. Our bodies can't really deal with that. The complexity, the noise, the stress, the amount of people, the information, how we function socially, in relationships, professionally, everything has changed, and it's changing so fast. And it causes us to have an enormous amount of stress. And it creates noise. Most people, they have to self-medicate in many different ways because the noise is always there, right? When we try to relax, sometimes we're even more stressed, right? Because it's always there. And what is happening is that when we live in a complexity that is far beyond what we can deal with, we get systemic stress, which means we're stressed chronically all over. So, and stress causes inflammation. So think of you being inflamed physically, mentally, emotionally, in your relationships. In every space that you're in, you experience inflammation because it gets stressed, because it's too complicated and you don't understand anything anymore. Your body cannot make sense of anything. And your mind and your emotions are struggling because they still think that we should live in the Stone Ages where life was a lot simpler. So, what happens when we are in a systemic inflamed state? We start to believe that the world is attacking us. because inflammation is conflict, right? Stress is conflict. So when that becomes our state of being, what happens? Our focus will be on conflict, and we will often attack each other. We will criticize. We will be negative. We will feel entitled because we're trying to protect ourselves. And then we create the story that other people are attacking us simply because we can feel they're not in harmony with us. We get less and less tolerant. It's just like having allergies, right? In the beginning, often, if you get an allergy like strawberries, for instance, often you can eat quite a lot before you start feeling itchy or something. But then over time, you tolerate less and less and less and less as the allergy begins to grow in you. And then it's like licking a strawberry or even seeing it can give you like a full inflamed reaction. It's the same thing. So as we build stress, we get less and less tolerant. And when you look at the public discourse today, if you look at what's happening in the world, the type of conflicts, right? We attack each other, we criticize, we hate for nothing. And it's difficult to keep our focus on the tasks, on solutions for the world because everybody feel attacked. So it's an inflamed communication. Often we are in different inflamed relationships. We create inflamed stories about each other and the world. Right? And when you zoom out and look at this planet and look at our global culture, this is what's going on. And it's getting worse. So when you also experience this level of stress, you will lower your own consciousness because inflammation will lower your consciousness. It will create conflict narratives. And that's not healing, it's the opposite. So this whole systemic stress thing is not good for us, right? And it means we need to lift our own consciousness, not just for a spiritual journey, but also for the planet. We're not able to focus on solutions. We're not able to focus on healing. We're not able to focus on creating a better world if we are in an inflamed state. So by having practices with that intention of lifting our consciousness and centering us, the brain will release stress. Our bodies will release stress, and we begin to feel and sense more clarity, right? And that's the first step. And then we begin to lift our consciousness, which means we can then connect to a bigger image, right? We can start seeing what's really going on and what's important. When we are in our lowest consciousness, we're in a jungle. Nothing makes sense. We're not able to navigate. And when you look at people's lives today, fewer and fewer people are able to navigate. And when you can't navigate, then you want rules, right? And when you can't navigate, you get the feeling that everybody's in your way all the time. So you want rules for others. Look at what's happening today, the conflicts. This is what's going on. And as spiritual travelers, we need to take responsibility for ourselves. And if you notice in yourself that you have a tendency to criticize, to create conflicts, to feel noise, well, you need better spiritual practices. Right? So maybe it's time for you to test out more practices and just see them as different tools. Right? You can apply several ones. You just use one. It's up to you. We'll get back to mantras. We mentioned that we're having a mantra course starting. And I'll get back to why mantras are so wonderful to work with and why they're so important. But we'll also look at other practices. We have a question?
Yeah, we have a question from IKYA online. It's kind of the fundamental question of the evening, and he describes it as, I have in this lifetime really struggled with keeping a spiritual practice and even a practice in general, like a basic meditation, is difficult to maintain. And even with all the assistance from studying with you and other disciplines before, he's still struggling, and he feels that he has enough with everyday life. Like that, I think, and that's kind of the heart of this for a lot of us seekers, is just maintaining an everyday life, family and kids, and a house and a job and all of that. How do we squeeze spiritual practices into that? That's really his question, is like, how do we do it for real?
Now, if we go back to the image of when we are in the low horizontal consciousness, life is a jungle. It's difficult to navigate. It's more confusing. We spend a lot of energy on being out of balance, because everything will feel it's out of balance, and then we're struggling, trying to make sense of it all and trying to make it work. When we zoom out, we get it. We can see it. And we can also look at ourselves and our life from a navigational point of view. So, I'm standing there, I'm going over there. Okay, I could just walk over there. And we get it. So when we apply a spiritual practice, it actually saves us a lot of energy. When we look at the practical perspective, that we get more direction, we get more calm, we get less stressed. We're better at organizing our lives. We do more of what works and less of what does not work. There are also plenty of studies showing that, for instance, when you meditate and you get into a good practice of meditation, it's more effective and more efficient than sleep. So it's about twice as efficient when it comes to relaxation and the effect it has on the brain and the body as sleep. So for each hour you meditate, you get 1 hour. So if you meditate for 15 minutes, you actually get 15 minutes, because you will have more energy, and when you get more rested. So it's also that, seeing that you get in a different position. And to me, it's more the question, how can people afford not to have a spiritual practice? When you gain time, you get an overview, you become more productive, you get a better sense of direction and purpose, and you become more productive in your life in general. So when we are in our chaos, we think that this is how life is, this we just need to do whatever. Well, yeah, but no. It's like trying to figure out cooking without a recipe when you really don't know how to cook, and it's mess everywhere, and you think, I have no time to read a fucking recipe. I was like, no, you start with a recipe. Right? That's how you get the result. In less time, with less mess. And a spiritual practice will connect you to the recipe of your life. Because as we know, life is a lot of cooking. It's a lot of just combining stuff and trying to make things work, which is the cooking part. But without the recipe, and you have no idea what ingredients life has given you, and you just try to figure out, what could I make with this? And you use half of the ingredients, and it's mess everywhere, and you have no idea what you're baking, and maybe you're not even baking, maybe you're supposed to do something else with it, and you have no idea. So the argument that we don't have time to look at the recipe is something that comes from the ego. We like mess. We like excuses. We enjoy life being difficult because it will give us excuses. The ego has absolutely no need for spiritual expansion, because spiritual expansion means that the ego will shrink. The point of spiritual practices, and this is what you can see all over the world, in all cultures, all traditions, once you get into them, and often you start from the point of ego, which is really interesting. For instance, when people start doing meditation or whatever, and people start, their process of moving into spiritual work, it comes from the ego. Most people say, well, I want to be spiritual, right? I want to be powerful. I want other people to admire me, right? I want to be right all the time. I want to teach people because they really need what I can tell them. All of that, which is just fluff, right? But, it's a starting point, right? Because we all start in the ego and there is nothing wrong with it. But because you would never be able to establish an intention beyond your ego in the beginning. When you are in that self-serving consciousness, talking about spiritual service will be interpreted into, people will see how great I am and I will give of myself to the world and they will fall to my feet. It's that. It never stops. So we start from the ego and wanting to be powerful and all of that is okay. But as we move into the practices, it doesn't matter what type of practice you have, but when you go in depth, you begin connecting to something beyond the self. And that has always been the purpose. That's what people who have been dedicated to the spiritual process always have figured out. There is something beyond the self. There is something beyond the mind. There is something beyond me. And the more we connect, the more we work, we get into a sense of contextuality where the self all of a sudden is not important. It's irrelevant. And we experience it. We go, oh, wow. My self-centeredness is just a misunderstanding. My ego is just a misunderstanding. When we become part of something greater, the stress goes away. The mind relaxes, the body relaxes. All our stuff and all our stories are simply gone. And you get it. So going beyond the self, going beyond the mind, going beyond the ego, in all tradition, that's the first step. That's the first kind of level you're looking for. And then you go deeper. But if we just focus on that first step, this is where we need to go first to kind of break free from this human shell, from this, the story we have about our own existence in this body. And it doesn't happen by itself. It happens by having a practice that we repeat. So gradually, we make a whole. If you think of, I often describe that your mind and how you see the world is still the inner kind of walls of your mind. Because through the self, through the individual, we will always experience it through the point of the self. And the thing is, when people run around and try this or that, it's not working, it's not working, it's not working, and they go from teacher to teacher, practice to practice, and they take this course and this course and this book, and nothing is working. It's like, if you're trying to drill a hole in a wall, and you start and then you stop, no, it's not, maybe over here. You start drilling that, no, that didn't work either. No, it's not quick enough. Okay, let me try here. No, maybe I should use a nail instead. And then you start doing that, you go over there and do it, nothing works because nothing is working, there's no hole here. What do I have to do? Right? And often when we try too many things, we don't get any results. Because it's about penetrating that wall. So in my experience, any practice can actually help you. It's about that focus and dedication, repetition and discipline, meaning that you're drilling in the same spot in your wall, right? Because any technique will have the same approach, right? So that's where you will drill your hole. And the point is to drill a hole in the wall, not where you do it, right? And it's that. From the ego, we will often, well, this is not working for me, so I should try something else. Not understanding that it's you that is not working. It's not the technique, it's you. You are not doing it right. You are not applying the practice correctly. it takes repetition and discipline and patience. Right? It's just like, because you could probably tell if you have a wall and the point is to drill a hole. You know that if you just keep drilling in the same hole, you will at some point get to the other side, right? So why is it when it comes to spiritual practices that we think it works a different way? It's always us. Remember that a spiritual practice and the purpose is to transform who we are, transform our consciousness, transform our flow and our experience of reality so we have access to something else. So you are ultimately the technique. You are the practice. Right? It's just like when we look at building a house or remodeling it. You can use a lot of different tools, and sometimes you have to. But still, it's always about getting the job done. I saw a comparison test on coffee, I think it was last year or something, where they had a professional barista making coffee with the cheapest espresso maker on the market. It was just horrible. And then you had an amateur making coffee with one of the most expensive coffee makers in the world, professional grade, right? And you would obviously think that the machine did the job, but no, it was actually the barista with the cheapest coffee maker that made the best coffee, right? It's not about the technique and the practice in itself, it's about you. And this is also why often when I talk with people, and they've been doing a practice for maybe like 15, 20 years, and they come to me and say, like, it's not working. I said, of course it's not working. You're just sitting there and you're just doing it. You're not present. You're not applying it. It's like if you have a toolbox and you start waving tools around and, oh, we're building a house. You're not. It's always about applying them correctly. And you are both, the house that needs remodeling, and you're also the carpenter. You have to apply things right. And that's always where we get it wrong. Because we're not fully present to our own awakening. When we're in the state of self, we have no interest, right? And this is also one of the challenges when we begin a practice and the ego starts feeling, oh, all right, we're actually shrinking, aren't we? And you get to the point where you also spiritually begin to connect. You begin to understand, oh, all right, my ego is actually in the way. My self-interest and all these stories that I have about my spiritual ambition, it's just fluff. And then you have to move into a very different kind of setting in yourself. And in that kind of tipping point, the ego will often win until it doesn't. And this is why when you look at all traditions, it's discipline, 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 repetition, 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 because we know that it's the only way. And to me, this is more important than the type of practice you have. It's discipline and repetition. Because as long as you're trapped in your ego, you cannot be trusted. You cannot trust yourself because yourself should not be trusted, right? It's all about going beyond it. And then it's that process of simply doing it until things begin to happen, because they will. But you still need to have dedication, right? You need to have that clear intention. And that is often where, again, we don't get results. Because you just want to feel good and you just want to solve all your problems, you want to have a good life, like all of these things. And it's not what spiritual practices are for. It's for you to reach a higher level of consciousness so you can shut up and go beyond yourself. and then begin to be a presence in life that can assist everyone in healing and growing and expanding. It's really not about you. It's about everything but you. So it takes time to move into that understanding. So it's not easy, but for many of you, when you feel that your practices are not giving you what you want, it's because of this. You make it about you. You think about what you want to achieve. Your goal should be to go beyond all of that, because then you can even see your life in a greater context. And then you understand, oh, right, I could do this. This is more productive. We begin to connect to a greater image, and so we can be in greater harmony with the world around us, which means that what we do will be positive not only for us, but for everything around us. Right? We're not able to find the level of harmony without in the spiritual practices. Do we have any more questions?
First, a quick reminder to our studio audience, if you guys do want to ask a question, just signal to me over here, and then we'll give you guys the signal back when we're ready to turn the microphone on. So, oh, well, we do have a question. All right, we'll jump to Eli first.
Hi. It's another question than to do many things, but is it sometimes too many practices that can be done during a day?
It depends if they are part of the same exercise or practice. I think back to the kind of eclectic thing, trying to drill several holes at the same time is not productive. And many people today, they like to go shopping, right? Because they want to see how this makes them feel, right? Because it's all about that, right? So the dedication is not going beyond the self, it's actually strengthening the sense of self. So then you do a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and then you get all confused again, right? Because when you apply too many things at the same time, that will create noise. But you want to do it your way because it's so important to me. Like all of that, right? It's still the ego state, and it's where we start. But in the old days, people only knew about one practice because that was a practice of their culture or of their religion, whatever it was. And now we can basically, do anything. And I think that is wonderful, but it requires that we're smarter. Right? Because nobody's telling us you can't do that, or you should just do it this way. We want to explore. And that can be a very positive thing. But we need to be aware also that we can easily trick ourselves, because when we feel that we are in control, we are actually amplifying the ego. Right? So being in that listening state, that is part of most practices. You really try to listen to your life, try to listen, how can I be more in tune? I'm not in tune with myself. It's, if all of that, cancel it. Any sentence that includes you or yourself or whatever, or your needs, eliminate it from your practices. It will simply make you hit the wall. You can never go beyond that barrier as long as you focus on yourself. But we can apply different techniques and kind of variations if they're pointing in the same direction. Then they can amplify each other.
Because I'm just thinking about sometimes it's like easy to just sit and meditate for 7 hours, and can that be too much, or is there no depth of how long you...
Well, this is part of the
meditate?
exploration, because I also advise people to have meditations and practices for several hours and several days, but not all the time, right? It's part of the listening. What is productive? But I think on a daily basis, that would not make you very productive. And we get more efficient over time when we have established our practices, because, as I often explain, in the beginning when you meditate, it can take you hours and days to get into the state of meditation. It's a state where you gradually have the experience that you don't exist anymore, right? Because that is the first step, that you can feel that you really don't exist, you're a nobody, and you don't even know your own name and you can't think. It's that. So, over time, you can do that in about 1 minute, because you get better at it, right? And then it's reaching the state of meditation is more important than for how long you do it, because it's about connecting you to you, the true you, to reality, to your flow, to higher consciousness, so that you can use that as a starting point in your human journey every day. Instead of walking around in the jungle, you have that part of you that is up there, and you have that overview, and you can see and you can navigate, and then you bring that down into your life, meaning that you have a sense of direction, you have a sense of purpose, you understand what you're doing and why. So we need both, right? And also when it comes to applying what you learn in your practices, you need to do it in real life. That's also the imbalance you get in if you spend too much time in spiritual practices and too little time being productive, because it's in your life you will truly test out what you have understood, because you still need to walk through the jungle, right? It doesn't help for you to sit out there in your high viewpoint to say, oh, I like over there, or there, You have to do it as well. So when you go down into the jungle again, you still have to navigate, but now at least you know where you're going. But the process is the same. You still have to, be on your journey. You have to do what you need to do, but you will be in balance, right? You will be in harmony and communication with nature, so that instead of being consumed by the suffering of your own karma, you will move more swiftly and with less pain, and you will be able to also focus on the joy of expansion.
So the read on YouTube here is that we've been circling around it, but we need to address more directly the kind of state before you pick the tool. A lot of us seem to be stuck more in that image you gave us of being inside in our egos, inside our mind, seeing the walls of our mind, and we want to break through, right? A lot of us struggle, it's like we're in this illusion that really, really wanting to break through the hole will happen without having to do anything, without choosing a tool, because no tool seems either like we have time for it, or we really want, we don't want to meditate, we don't want to reflect or do that kind of thing, but we really want to break through. So I think you've been circling around maybe the seeing something beyond what I want or what I need as a way to kind of move past the ego's bullshit, to put it that way. But could we just speak to that directly for a moment?
I think one of the great challenges we have today as humans is that we're living in a consumer world, which means the market is catering to your every need and whatever you want. And if you don't like that, oh, I want a little bit like that, and then you get it, right? And you don't have to put up with anything. I'll take my business elsewhere, right? And so it's all about getting everything you need in detail. No, I don't quite like that. You can find a variation, any type of variation within any type of product anywhere, right? So we then begin to believe, oh, this is how it should be. I should always get what I want because I deserve it, because I'm so special, right? And then when it comes to spiritual practices, we apply the same thing. We're a customer. So it should be fun, and it should make me feel good, and it should make me rich, and it should make me feel powerful and accepted, and it shouldn't take any time, and all of that, because we are looking at it as a consumer. And spiritual practices are not necessarily fun. But when we have brainwashed ourselves into believing that everything should be fun and pleasant and yummy and delicious and make us feel good and nurture the ego, blah, 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 we can't do it. Why would we then do something that is not satisfying any of that? We have to decide that when it comes to spiritual growth for real, it does not have to be fun. It does not have to be something you want to do. You don't have to see the benefit. Like all of these things we associate with being a customer, that we have to set aside and say, right, I can do that in my life when I go to the store, when I buy snacks, when I watch TV, whatever, but not when it comes to spirituality. Then it's about the opposite. You cannot cater to your ego and your needs and at the same time try to go beyond it. So try to go into a state, try to apply a practice that does not feel good, that does not give you anything. It's not supposed to give you anything. It's supposed to bring you out of the limitations of the ego. Right? So the ego is not supposed to be fed. So we have to make a decision as individuals that, right, this is actually the purpose of it. So it cannot satisfy me. If it satisfies me, I'm most likely doing it wrong. So it's also moving into a mindset beyond the consumption. And for humans today, this is extremely difficult because we're so used to, again, being in this constant state of need. And as I talked about before, it comes from the systemic stress, right? The systemic stress is what makes us self-medicate. And then many people think that spiritual practices are part of the self-medication practices, right? So you eat snacks, you watch TV, you do this, you do that, you go shopping, all of that, and then you also do yoga to make you feel good and to create a story of, oh, I'm so spiritual. Look at me, because that gives you something. Right? As long as you include your spiritual practices in your ongoing self-medication program, you will expect your spiritual practices to give you what you need. This is also a huge reason why people don't succeed for real. Right? But when you think of it, when you try to look at the thoughts and feelings you have around spiritual practices, most likely your brain has categorized spiritual practices as part of the self-medication program. And you need to lift it out of that. See, this is something completely different. It's a whole different category. It should not give me anything. It's about going beyond the concept of self and then connecting to what is greater, connecting to the higher version of what I am, beyond the self, beyond the ego. And yes, that can also be very kind of satisfying once you get there, right? You know, if you experience higher sense of consciousness, it's confirming in a very different way. It's confirming in a way that you're not this person. You're not that ego. You belong to something greater. Welcome home. Welcome to reality. It's that. So it's going there and then bring that down into your human state, because that will also make you grow out of all your self-medication. Because self-medication happens when you're out of balance. And most people are now out of balance in like 50 different ways at the same time. Right? And that is what we need to do something about. Spiritual practices will do something about this. Not necessarily for you to get rid of everything, because the human journey today is complex, but you will be more centered, more balanced. And that will assist you in being a better version of yourself, and also be able to navigate and get kind of spiritual results.
Leanna online, she's wondering about, you've talked before about the dopamine addiction that we have. I'm kind of connecting that with what you're saying about the shopping that we're doing all the time, looking for hits, and she's wondering, could you speak a little bit about how that also then goes into the effect that we can get in deep meditation, or even getting to deep meditation?
Right. Yes, the dopamine addiction is an essential part of your self-medication strategies, and because it can basically cover anything. Any stress, any pain, any discomfort in life, dopamine will help you. So it's the go-to drug for the brain. And it's because it's a pain relief, right? It's when we recognize I can't deal with this, the answer is dopamine. It's smart for survival, right? Because it's just to survive for as long as you can, having kids, and just try to be part of evolution, and then you die, right? So dopamine is very smart, but we've figured out throughout evolution how to manipulate our own production in different ways. So yes, it's definitely part of it. And also, when it comes to spiritual practices, this is often what people seek. When many talk about their spiritual flow, they're really talking about how to maximize dopamine production, right? And this is often what people are looking for in spiritual practices. And they get disappointed if they don't get the dopamine, because that makes them feel so good, and then they think that the practice is not working. When you go into a deep spiritual practice, it will not affect your chemistry at all, because it's no longer linked to your person and your ego and your self-medication. It's beyond that. And it can correct it, it can balance it, but you will not feel a dopamine rush. It's not wrong if you feel it. I'm just saying you are in the beginnings, in the first kind of stages. When you go beyond that membrane of the mind, membrane of the self, you can be in extreme amount of flow, but as a person you can't necessarily feel it. It's very different. The flow in the heart is very different from the dopamine flow, right? And the flow in the heart is selfless. Dopamine is basically self more, right? It's that, but we learn, this is the thing, like we all start from the ego, we all start from the pain, we all start with all of that, and that's fine. But I've talked with so many people over the years, and they hit the wall, right? Because they're doing all of this, and they don't understand why they're not reaching higher levels of consciousness for real, right? And also when they think a higher level of consciousness is just even more dopamine, right? They can't get there. It takes dedication and discipline and repetition. And what we do over time, no matter what practice we have, if we're doing it right, is that we're creating pathways in our brains. This is what happens when we repeat. For instance, if you have a meditation practice and you go into deep meditation, right? And the reason why you can do it faster after a few years is because your brain has built the pathways you have repeated so many times that they bring, right, well, first we go there, and then we go there, and then we do a little bit of this, and then we feel that, and then we have the, you've all done it. If you've been in deep meditation, you move through different kind of like spaces in yourself until you get there. And then the brain over time will build brain cells and connections that will establish a pathway. So you go, that one, and you just like, the brain will assist you. So this is the great benefit of going in depth and truly working with a practice over time, is that you will be able to go deeper more quickly, and then you always, it's just like, digging a tunnel, right? You have to go to the other side, but it's not like you have to dig the same tunnel every day. Each time you start, you'll just, okay, blah, 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 you'll simply move through the part of the tunnel you've built. And then you start hacking. right? And this is what we do in our practices. Building these pathways, like getting to the highest state we're used to, yeah, that's not the job. It's trying to work from there. This is also why we need repetition. We need to explore ourselves and what type of tunnel we are kind of digging, right? And always try to push ourselves further and more efficient. And it's not happening quickly. Remember, in most traditions, people would sit, for 30 years in meditation, right? It's in our consumer mindset, we think, well, this should be working for me because I'm so divine, right? I should feel something because God should speak to me through this technique. If it's not, this technique is obviously not working, right? It's like a phone with bad connection. You want a better one because it can't be you, right? It's all of that. The amount of work it takes to break through spiritually is beyond most people's comprehension. That's what it takes.
So Dag online, he asks about the effectiveness of open eyes versus closed eyes in meditation. And I think that speaks a little bit also to, could you say something about the mechanics of meditation?
Yes. I thought I'll go through, different types of practices so we can also understand the difference. We can start with meditation because that's very common. Now, there are many different ways to meditate. And there are apps today, there are different traditions, like all cultures have had their own version of it. It's connecting, right? Having that intention of connection and placing your focus, and then beginning to explore your own connectedness. And then opening up and then reaching different types of consciousness and over time higher consciousness. There's so many different ways to do it because it's the process of getting there. And in meditation, also why it works is because when you close your eyes and you begin kind of listening, the brain changes how it works. And over the last decade, one has done a lot of kind of brain scans of people who are in deep meditation, see what is actually happening. And what happens when we move kind of into our inner worlds, just like when we go to sleep, right? The brain changes how it works. It starts shutting off the outer senses, and you start moving into your subconscious, right? And the body will be switched off as well. So you're not physically present and awake. In meditation, we go into a kind of bridge state, which means that you are awake, but so is the subconscious, which means the bridge between the two will be established. Because often when we are awake, when we are asleep, it's two different formats, right? So when you are in your life, you're not necessarily aware of what's going on in your subconscious. And when you are in your subconscious, it's disconnected from the kind of day-to-day awake consciousness. In the meditation, a bridge will be established so that there will be maximum communication between the two. And this is also why it's normal to both kind of visualize having experiences, this or that, because that is the subconscious mind creating imagery, communicating then with the conscious part of the brain. So the exchange and the processing can be amplified tremendously. Normally you will experience something and then your subconscious will work on it separately, right? And you will dream about it, this or that, and all of a sudden you will have some kind of feeling or a thought. But in meditation, it opens up so that you can have almost like a full level communication between those two aspects of your brain, meaning that the kind of processing power and the processing efficiency increases several times. One has also seen that, we've all heard that we normally use about like 7 to 10% of the brain. We use all of the brain, but not at the same time. So you can see, yes, between 5 to 10% of the brain is being used at any given moment, but it kind of shifts around. In deep meditation, when it's registered, the people can use up to 90% of their brain continuously. The brain connects to itself. And it changes the map. It changes how the brain will analyze things. Because remember also, you have many different programs, many different brain cells who are not even aware of each other. You have so many different narratives, stories, experiences, different conclusions, and often you have conclusions that pull in different directions. You have so many of them. That's part of the noise. But instead of all of the brain kind of operating independently, point by point, experience by experience, and the different narratives of memories and all of that, the brain can connect to itself and you get a more full understanding of who you are and your presence to your own existence. And you start kind of bathing in this space of information about yourself. This is just the biological part. What also happens, of course, is you open up what we call vertically. So you connect with the higher being, like a higher consciousness outside of this lifetime, outside of this body, and that begins to circulate as well. Meaning that you have in your brain, in your mind, that circulation horizontally, which is being here in this world, in this body, and then that also starts to circulate with higher levels of consciousness, and that will be all mixed together, which means that your processing increases even more. Right? Because then you will also, from the higher level outside this lifetime, have access to the greater image. You can see the maps and the landscapes and have insights that are not really connected to you as a person. But all of that can then be used in your personal journey as it starts to kind of circulate. And in that process, most people have epiphanies and insights, and they suddenly understand things, and they sense things, and they, like from a deeper perspective, in a way you could never achieve with, being yourself in your life and sitting and thinking and trying to figure things out. It's not even close. So the mechanics of meditation is bringing you to a state where you are in kind of the maximum amount of communication in yourself and with life. And as you become better at it, your ability to connect to more and more and more and more and understand it is simply increases and it never ends. Now, there are techniques where you can have your eyes open or eyes closed. There's laying down, sitting. I think it's also part of the exploration to try different things just to see what happens and like, how is this affecting my process? And finding different angles can be interesting. It will still be kind of part of the same type of journey as meditation is kind of a way to connect and to open yourself up. And it increases both your intelligence and kind of your experience of who you are beyond this person. Because remember, this person that you think you are is just a very, very small fraction of who you are. So all of that opens up. So meditation is, I would say, the most important practice. There are many different types. People can use visualization. They can use guided meditations. They can use the kind of old school techniques from traditions and this or that. But over time, you begin understanding what's going on, and then you're better at kind of picking your tools, right? But I advise everyone to have a meditation practice. And often I advise people to have the practice in the morning, because then you get a better starting point for your day. Instead of first wandering through the jungle, right? Not understanding anything during your day, and then you can process that at the end of the day and see what you should have done. I think it's better to have the outlook at the start of the day to get a better sense of navigation, and then you try to apply it. Okay, but everyone can find their own kind of path in it. One practice, of course, that many also are familiar with is yoga. And yoga has in the West become something else than it really was meant to be. And often I say, this is just, gymnastics. It is a very profound and deep spiritual practice because it's also, if you think that any position also represents a certain vibration, right? It's understanding that when you are in a certain position, it does something to the flow in the body. It does something to how the brain works, how your connections and how your consciousness operate also in your body, right? So it's a way to apply certain kind of like openings, right, to your flow. But for that to happen, you also need to be in a spiritual awareness. You need to have that intention of using your position to truly try to also penetrate, to go higher, and to open yourself to that vibration of that particular position. But because, again, in the West, we are consumers, it's been mostly about how does this make me feel, and I feel so good, and like all of that. Try to do the opposite. Try to see how the different positions can assist you in aiming higher and connecting higher, and also help you becoming pure in your own presence, right? Because that is the purpose. As a spiritual practice, as you were probably aware of, you know, in the old days, you could have yogis also practicing one position for years, right? Just as a meditation technique or another practice, just to truly study what the kind of that particular angle, that particular flow, and understand that that position means that you will be kind of disciplined in that particular area. Understanding that you can't necessarily drill all the holes at once, but I can make a really big hole right there. So yoga can be wonderful also because it includes the body. And I think it's so important that we include the physical body, because often in spiritual practice we can become too much in our heads, right? I've seen so many people meditating and they're just flying away because they don't have the sense of grounding, and they want to fly away as a part of their self-medication program. Yoga makes it more physical, and I'm all for that. So I think applying some form of yoga can also be helpful. But try to go beyond that kind of, you know, that posing yoga that we often see in the West. It's also a positive thing for that, but as a spiritual practice, try to unlock the potentials in yoga and try to go beyond that you know, simple version that people often go for. One other thing, you know, I'll just go through a few of them. Prayer is also a spiritual practice. If you look at most traditions, most culture, they have a type of prayer, you know, and you can pray in a way that is productive and pray in a way that is not. The typical way that does not work is as when you try to tell God what to do. It's listing, you know, how God should do its work, and look at me and my needs and please give me what I want. That thing is extremely arrogant and, again, self-centered. When people begin going deep into prayer, in all traditions, they stop talking. True prayer is an act of listening. It's understanding that, oh, right, I don't have to talk to God because God's been talking to me all along, but I was too busy talking. So, although the practice of prayer starts with you talking to God, after a while, it can be years, you know, you begin moving past your need to talk because you understand that the problem was that you were not listening. So prayer becomes a state where you try to listen, where you become vulnerable to the communication. And you try to surrender to that and to become a better listener and to take it in and to let that transform you. And then often prayer is the same as one can do in meditation. You can place a focus. Right? So it's bringing in a focus in your listening. And then just move into that state where you decide that I'm now in a holy place in myself where my communication with the one will be amplified. So it's basically saying, I'm ready, I'm listening. And it's basically you preparing yourself. The communication is always there, but it's not always that we are there, right? So it's allowing yourself to be in an active state of listening. And when you do that, prayer can be wonderful, but please drop the telling God what to do crap. No. It's not a spiritual practice, it's an ego and power practice. I would also say, like plant medicine has become really popular over the last few years, and because basically it's, taking drugs and calling it spiritual. It is, of course, linked to traditions. And when plant medicine is used in the right context, it is disciplined, it is deep, and the people who've been dealing with this for a very, very long time, right? So they're able to hold space, and it's then part of a greater practice. It's not the practice in itself, it's part of the practice. And then it can assist us in opening spaces and entering spaces that we're not able to enter otherwise. Often when we're blocked, when we have too many stories and too many belief systems and all of that, it can help us blast doors open, but then we need to learn how to enter. Often when we are still impure, we will have a lot of experiences that can be eye-opening, but they do not necessarily translate to real life. And I've seen so many people, they've been to a lot of ceremonies and this and that, but it has not really changed them at all because they've not been able in their real life to apply any of it. And it simply means that, you were not ready to start with. That's why the door was closed. You had not reached the level in your growth where that door would normally open. You just blasted the door open, and then you thought that, because you're now in that space, it will change your life. And for the most part, it does not. You need to have a full practice around it, right? Some people, and maybe that's some of you, have a good practice around it. Maybe you also have been studying with people who are really good at this, so that you have been able to channel it and transform it and use it in your life, seeing that you have been able to make major changes. That also happens. But the plant medicine in itself will not do it for you. Just like any technique is a tool, it's how you apply it. And you being the real practice, that is what matters.
Related to that, Susan online asks about vibrational tools like crystals, vibrational essences and sprays and acrylics and things. She wonders first, can they actually assist in our spiritual practices? And if so, how do they assist?
Right. Many use different type of tools. It could be essences, it can be different things, crystal, all of that, and we are definitely for that, and we work with those as well in what we do here. And how they work is, when it comes to essences, like vibrational essences, think of them as different tuning forks, right? And in us, we have a lot of different things going on. It's not like you only have one type of karma you're studying. It might be several hundred different kind of karmic topics that you are studying from different angles. It's very complex. So we have all sorts of both like huge imbalances, micro imbalances, and misunderstandings and blockages, this or that. And what essences can do is, since they kind of vibrate specific things, they can then address and mirror that particular vibration. So often when we test out an essence, for instance, it's based on then the person being in a specific type of process where some pain points or blockages are more prominent. And then an essence can amplify that awareness and amplify the process and healing around it by simply making the information more available. Because if you think of the essence also being information, right? It's vibrational information. So think of when you have a blockage and you're trying to figure out what is this, and then you get an essence vibrating the solution. You will begin having thoughts and feelings, and you will start to observe things and do things. It's very subtle. But it's like you are already in that position of having solved it. So when that starts to circulate, it's like you connect to the solution, you connect to the healing process. And then you can apply that. So it's a very kind of subtle and kind way to kind of amplify the healing process. And the same with crystals. We also work with that, obviously. They're vibrational beings that can both kind of channel. Remember, they are crystalline structures. So when flow is channeled through a crystal, it will be kind of specialized, will operate within a certain spectrum. And it's the same thing. That will then target a specific type of karmic process, specific type of blockage or solution or thought, or whatever it is you need. And that will then be amplified. And there are many ways to work with crystals, and how we do it here is also working with crystals as higher beings. And we call them often guardians, which are like beings that project themselves also through specific crystals to assist you in your spiritual journey. So you get a lot more out of the work you do with the crystals. But crystals are absolutely wonderful tools. And this is, these are examples of things we can do no matter what type of practice we have. We can combine different things because remember, you are the practice, right? So it's a matter of finding often the combination of things you feel will kind of work together. But using essences and vibrational tools and crystals or whatever, it's part of the exploration, right? And often when you're drawn to something, it's because, all right, that vibrates something, it mirrors something you need in that exact moment.
Arya in the Netherlands asks about sexual yoga and the Tantra, what role they play in spiritual practice.
Well, it's not about what role it plays. Like, yeah, that's also tools. So it's more if we are drawn to a certain tool, maybe there is something there. I think working with our sexual flow is very important. Most people today, also because of the stress and because of our culture being completely off the hook in so many ways, how we relate to our sexual flow is also quite imbalanced. And for many to restore the sexual flow also as a spiritual flow, a spiritual force, right? And to purify it and understand how we can use it to also expand our awareness and expand our kind of spiritual presence and understand ourselves better, that is wonderful. And there are many ways to do that. As is like sexual yoga and tantra, all of that. I think it's for everyone to explore and like try things out to see if there is something that connects, right? And just see. But in general, I would say that humans today have huge sexual blockages. And to kind of release that and open up and connect with your sexual flow as a spiritual potential is very important. I always say that everything in the universe is sexual. The purpose behind everything is sexual because co-creation, exchange is sexual. When you combine two chemicals, you get a third one. That's sexuality. When you have two thoughts and they communicate, you get a new thought. That's sexuality. when we connect with someone and there's an energetic exchange, that's sexual. Because that will create something else. That will create something new. It will give a new experience. It will bring something into being that hasn't existed before. So everything in the universe is connected as an exchange, and that is what sexuality is, right? It's that a state where in that meeting, the exchange, the co-creation means that something else comes into being. And it's also learning that our sexuality as humans are part of that. But when we have kind of lost the understanding of this, spiritual also purpose of our sexual flow, most people's sexuality is extremely disconnected and often bring people more frustration and harm and everything else than being healing and opening up the heart and opening up the consciousness. And I think many people are instinctively, they know that there is something here that they need to heal. And many people, they do kind of great progress through working with their sexual flow. So yes, this is definitely an area also that most people will connect with at some point. There are many different ways to work with their sexual flow, but it should definitely be included in some way because it's part of the human journey.
All right, I think the big question hanging in there is, what about the practice of mantra?
Mantras, and one of the reasons why I teach mantras is because it teaches you that you are the practice, right? It's your voice, it's vibration, and you do something, and you are the instrument. It's not something outside of you. Often when we do certain things, and it can also be, people are also drawn to rituals and symbols and all of that, but it's something outside of you, right? I have to do this a certain way because then I'm allowed to have a connection, right? It's like, because I've done right, then it can come. With a mantra, it's you, and you're vibrating. You become the tuning fork, and then you can start sensing things happening. They happen in you and they happen in your life. And it assists you very directly in tuning your strings as an instrument. Because it doesn't matter how much we work. I often compare that to, a violinist. The more he plays, the more he will have to tune his instrument. Right? So when we live, we will always move into states of imbalance, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's part of always being in contact with something we haven't figured out yet. When we don't understand something, we will immediately be in a state of imbalance. So to grow, we need to embrace imbalances. But mantras mean that we have the tuning forks and we become the tuning fork, and we will more easily tune back in. And different mantras, they address different things. So for instance, with a mantra course, we study specific angles. So when we use a mantra for a whole month, your whole life will be transformed to be about that topic and that angle. And you will be able to study your karma and yourself and your life processes through that lens. Because your whole flow will kind of be filtered through that mantra. And it's really fun because you get to see, like, once I change my vibration slightly, things will express themselves differently, and I can go into different spaces in myself, and I can then study the principle, because this is the fun thing about a mantra, is you also get to learn about the principle of what it represents and what you are to study in yourself and in life, and what happens both inside of you and outside of you. So when you're using a mantra, you can start also sensing that flow. And when you also have the teaching, it assists the mind and the consciousness in understanding what is it that I'm sensing, right? Because you get a certain flow and you can feel it, and then you go, oh, right, it means that. Okay, that's how this feels. That's the sensation of this. So you also build up your competence in understanding different vibrations, different energies, different flow. And then you build up a whole kind of toolbox of different mantras that can assist you, and that you can use very specifically for whatever it is you want to study. So it brings you into specific positions of consciousness within yourself. And the wonderful thing about mantras is that you can apply them to any spiritual practice. Whatever you do, if it's meditation or yoga or plant medicine or reflection, walk in the woods, it doesn't matter. You can always use mantras because it's about you becoming someone who is more finely tuned. It brings you into that state of clarity and connectedness more efficiently. So working with mantras, they are the first practices that humans discovered, because it's just the use of sound and discovering how the sound and the voice can be soothing, how it can bring balance. And then in different traditions, one discovered different kind of combination of sounds, what that does, and how it can use both those kind of words, mantras, and the vibration to then lift us, ourselves up, and how we can enter different spaces. So they become very specific keys that can open specific doors. And they've been used all over the planet and also all other places. The mantras I teach are often non-human, because it's where we are on the planet now. There are definitely presence from other places, as you are all aware, and there is need also for mantras that will open up, also to bridge the reality that humans live in with the higher reality that includes more. So it also, these mantras will also assist you in becoming more aware in that type of reality that the planet is moving into. So you will more easily be in contact with spiritual beings, with also beings from other planets, as trying to assist. And so you can be an extension of that. And in general, have fun with becoming different versions of yourself. The mantras I teach are normally not known. They come from hidden traditions and non-human traditions. But because the training and the teaching is quite extensive, you get the right type of context. So you can study, and you'll have this kind of framework and support around you, so you can really go in depth and just try to explore as much as possible. And they all have a deep transformative effect on you, both kind of physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually.
Elizabeth asks a good question in relation to kind of where we're at in the timing with this course coming soon. She says that it's taken her 13 years to understand that she really doesn't understand this whole space of spiritual study, and she can be in a good phase where she wants to go deep and it feels genuine and she feels like she's really on top of her shit, and then somehow she falls out of it and loses that line, and she doesn't bother to hold on, and she wonders how to keep up a practice when you're in that feeling, and how might the mantra course that's coming up either help you keep going or get started if you're stuck.
Right. It's back to discipline. I always say that you always practice war when there's peace. When you are in those better phases, that's when you need to practice discipline. But often that's when we relax, because the natural flow and things are going so well, I should live a little, that. So we become less disciplined. So we become weaker when we then move into a phase where we need discipline to stay on track. So, discipline is the most important spiritual practice. that is the most powerful practice of all. Because that is what enables you to then apply spiritual practices and get result, because then you won't quit. So developing a state of discipline where we train our brains, train our minds, train our egos into just doing it. And it's not that difficult. It's that we have created a story from the consumer perspective. This should give me something, right? Just look at what we do every day. That does not give us anything. Brushing our teeth, for instance. Most people do that several times a day, at least twice a day, right? It's not something you look forward to. It's something you have to do. And you just do it, right? Showering, could be cleaning the house. Even though, yeah, I'm such a mess, well, you will still clean it sometimes. Not because you want to, but because it's necessary and you do it. Maybe you're not too keen on cooking. Well, you still do it because you need food. Right? And if you have a family, all the things you do, like with kids, with taking care of things, right? And you just like keep going, and you don't really want to, but there is no alternative because you have to. So it's based on the premise and the story and the expectations. Because, for instance, if you have kids and you like small kids and you have a family to run, you expect to be exhausted. You expect there to be difficulties, and you just keep going because you know you have to do all of these things. And you also remember to brush your fucking teeth, right? So, we need to apply the same way of thinking when it comes to spiritual practice as not something I can do if I feel like it. Because that's the consumer thing. I've said the same thing when it comes to going to the gym, for instance, like physical exercise. Whenever you start giving you the permission to feel if you want to do it today, you never do it. This is why also when many people start working out, they quit. Because they are in that consumer mindset where they think this should give me something, I should be inspired, I should get more energy. No. No. The thing is, you go to the gym every day. The end. Because you have to. So the moment you make these types of decisions, you keep doing it because it's simply what you do. Right? So again, when we do these things, they're not part of our self-medication program, which means we have a whole different set of expectations. And this is why we're able to do them. So when we're not, it's because we have placed spiritual exercises and practices in that bag. So, if you think of it just like brushing your teeth, taking a shower, like whatever it is you need to do in the morning, and there are certain things you do and you can't leave the house before you've done that, put it in that bag. We need to train our brains out of this self-absorbed, self-medication mindset around spiritual exercises. Because often when people shop around, it's also because they want to feel good, right? They want whatever they do to make them feel special, to make them feel good, to make them feel enlightened and connected and all of that, right? So it is important to just apply discipline and understand that, yeah, if you keep drilling or like hammering or nailing, whatever it is you do, at some point you will get through. So this is not difficult. And it's just having a conversation right now. Good. So, we need to decide that we do it no matter what, and we don't expect to achieve anything. It's simply something we do. Right? When you brush your teeth, you don't expect anything to happen. You don't think over time something will happen. No. It's you just do it because you have to. So look at it as hygiene is just something you do until you begin connecting for real, because that's when you can't stop. That's when it becomes something you look forward to and you do it and you see it as a high point of your day. Because then the higher version of you begins to influence your brain. And then that part sees that, oh, right, we need to adjust the human. It's the only way we can have free access. So then your brain over time will be rewired, and then even the chemicals will come. But it takes time. So until you're there, it's just discipline and forcing yourself to do it and creating a rule that you do it every day and you don't think about it. You don't think about how you feel. If you want to do it, you simply do it. And once we establish these type of rules, it's quite simple and it's quite easy. As I've seen people who not previously had any success going to the gym, when I explain this to them and assist them in establishing the productive way of thinking, they just go to the gym every day. It's not difficult. Do we have any more questions?
We have no more questions online at this time.
Good. There's a question right there.
All right, we have one in the audience.
I feel that the outcome of long-term practice has come into my life in many ways. Relationship, intimacy, the food is divine every time and just gets better and better. It's like never changes, stops changing, but to the better. So it's, and we appreciate that. Yet I still have areas in my life where it's like showstopper, I would call it. And knowing how it is in so many key areas that many people struggle with, and no struggle. And yet for me to get back into business after being out of the country for a long time has not been an easy ride so far. We'll see, but I don't talk about these things in business environment, but how could I, with so many signs of good happening, move that into all areas? Is that where the mantra course is the golden key?
Yes. The mantra course will definitely kind of sharpen you. It will give you a sense of mission, both in your own life, but also in serving life, because the mantras that I teach are extremely potent. If you've not been part of it before, I can guarantee that you've not experienced anything even close to what this is. It's a whole different level. And we have people in the course who've been working with mantras their entire life, and they're completely shocked by what's happening because it's a new level. That's also the point of the mantra course, is bringing in mantras that operate on a whole different levels. So one needs to be motivated to kind of cut through the fog and to penetrate that membrane of the mind and to do things for real. And with these mantras, people often feel that the transformations are more prominent. They can feel that they're being kind of pulled apart and rebuilt. And that's a wonderful thing about working with mantras, is like when you have advanced mantras, they are also connected to specific information, to specific flow, and also sometimes specific beings. meaning that you will be trained and you will be affected in very direct ways. So even for people who are not used to working with mantras, you can just skip beginner's class and go straight to this. All you need is that dedication inside that you truly want to cut through, that you truly want to wake up, and you want to establish a practice or several. But also learning about yourself as the instrument and as the channel and as the one having to carry out your own mission and not wait for someone to do it for you, right? That's such an important part of what we need to learn on a spiritual journey today, because traditionally it was all about being saved, submitting, and then someone will come to you, being good enough, and then God will love you, all of that, which is just part of power structure. Working with powerful mantras means that you become aware that it's you. It's all you. It's only you. So you have to build your competence. You have to build your skills. You have to build your awareness, because that's all you have. And then it becomes fun, because then you become more and more competent in the different spaces in your life and become more direct, more focused, because you understand that this is simply a rendering of your own consciousness, and you can interact with it and you can change it. So there are no limitations and no barriers. There's only you. And it becomes more interesting as this world begins to dissolve right before your eyes, and you can start doing things with it. And you can test out things through the vibrations of the mantras, because that will make certain aspects of life and what you're studying, it will become more translucent and kind of less solid, right? Because it's often easier to make change in your life when something becomes less solid, right? So through the lens of the different mantras, certain aspects of your life will then begin to dissolve a little, so you can go in and modify and get greater results more quickly if you have the focus and dedication. So working with mantras are absolutely wonderful, and they are the most kind of powerful direct tools to work with, no matter what type of practice you have. So I really hope that as many of you as possible can also join this course, because you will get so much out of it. But again, no matter what practice you have, it's still down to you. It's still down to you having that dedication and having the willingness and the discipline to repeat it so that you begin to work. It's not that the technique does not work. It's you not working, you not doing it right. But this is part of the spiritual journey, right? That we become better at what we do and to figure it out. As you also mentioned, like you have been able to open your life, and there are a lot of things that you sense that you got a hang of it, right? And that's wonderful, because this is what we should do with our incarnations. They belong to us. In a way, they are an extension of our own consciousness, our own journeys, and we should have fun. We should not feel that, oh, this is something happening to me. No, this is a space waiting for you to take action. And of course, when you're not, you will just live your life in the default setting, right? You will still be living in the demo version of your own life. Things can only start moving when you move. You can only transform life when you transform yourself. Things will only open up when you open up. This is the wonderful thing about spiritual practices in general. Life becomes magical and alive and wonderful. And learning that we can transform it, we can interact with it, we can change it, we can make it so much more interesting. That is, I think, the greatest gift and the greatest discovery from a human perspective when we get into spiritual practices for real. Do we have any more questions or comments?
Nope, that's all we've got here online, and I think from the audience as well.
Good. Then I will just remind you that we have an open house tomorrow for those of you who want to know more about the mantras. You have the information on screen. And when it comes to spiritual practices in general, follow your heart. Right? When there is something you're attracted to, try it out. Remember, it's your journey. You can do whatever. We get better at working with practices when we understand what it is we're trying to achieve. Right? And often in the beginning we don't. We're too full of our own ego. We're too full of our own pain and suffering. So that's where we start, is that we start with the ego. It's fine. You don't have to be pure in any way. Just start. But begin to aim. Try to understand what a solid spiritual practice can give you. And that it's necessary if you take your spiritual studies seriously. I see also people who study with me, if they don't take their spiritual practices seriously, they get into, I wouldn't say trouble, but there's a limit to how much they can actually absorb of what I give them. When you have a solid spiritual practice, you will become able to absorb more also because, as I said, your ability to process increases several times. You can get insights, you can get to realizations and plateaus in your consciousness that you're not able to do otherwise. So the combination of spiritual teachings and spiritual practice, they are both necessary. Because when you have a practice that increases your ability to process spiritual information, then you get more spiritual information. And that's how you can grow and expand a lot faster. Right? So if you are a spiritual student, if you see yourself as a spiritual traveler, try to look at what you do in your life. Try to look at your spiritual practices and move in the direction of discipline. I said discipline is spiritual practice number one, and then you choose your spiritual practice. So discipline is the most powerful tool in moving from the human state into the spiritual state. And when you combine discipline with mantras, I'll say, to me, mantras is where you go first in combination with meditation. Then things start happening for real. So that's what I would advise you to do, and I hope I see some of you tomorrow.
Amazing. Thank you, IKYA. Thank you all for joining us for this special episode of IKYA Live with our focus on spiritual practices. And again, the website that you need, ikya.org/mantra5, is on your screen. It's down in the comments below. The open house tomorrow, Tuesday the 19th of September, is starting at 18 o'clock or 6 p.m. Oslo time. We are going here at IKYA Center. We're also going live on Zoom if you want to directly be able to ask questions and basically converse with IKYA. Special opportunity for that, and also then on YouTube Live here again. We really look forward to seeing you. I mean, IKYA Mantra Collection 5 offers you a unique opportunity to expand and deepen your spiritual practice if you're one of those disciplined students out there, or if you're like many of us who are struggling to establish a practice. IKYA Mantra Collection 5 could offer you that entry point and a structure and discipline, as IKYA talks about. That first step is the discipline. So we look forward to seeing you tomorrow night. IKYA Live is back next Monday at 7 p.m. Oslo time. And until then, thank you again for joining us here at IKYA Live.